Picture this: a busy courtroom filled with murmurs as the case of the day unfolds. Everyone is seated, waiting for the judge to call the next case. The judge, a middle-aged white man with a reputation for being stern and direct, is known for his no-nonsense approach to law. But today, something is different. A woman steps forward, unassuming, dressed in professional attire. But something about her presence makes the judge visibly uncomfortable. His face twists in judgment, and without even acknowledging her credentials, he snickers and ridicules her in front of the entire courtroom. The room falls silent as everyone waits for her to respond. This could easily be dismissed as an unfortunate slip of the tongue, but what happens next makes the situation far more complicated. The woman doesn't falter. She doesn't shrink away. In fact, she stands tall, not bothered by the dismissive tone of the judge. The reason for her unshakable confidence will become clear soon enough. This woman, whom the judge presumed to be just another defendant or perhaps a junior lawyer, is in fact a federal prosecutor. Not only does she hold significant power within the judicial system, but she is there in her capacity to hold the judge's colleagues accountable. The judge, humiliated by his own assumptions, is now forced to reckon with the reality of who she truly is. What happens when authority figures are confronted by the very individuals they undermine? How does someone, who has spent years earning their position, manage to deal with the systemic biases that have been ingrained in the very system they're a part of? This incident, though extreme, serves as a lens through which we can view the broader issue of bias and stereotypes within the judicial system. Bias in the courtroom is not an isolated event. It is an ongoing issue that has far-reaching consequences. Courtrooms are meant to be places where justice prevails, but it is within these spaces that biases often flourish. The prejudices judges, lawyers, and even jurors bring into the courtroom can heavily impact the fairness of a trial. The judicial system, which prides itself on impartiality, has become a breeding ground for systemic biases that affect not only how cases are handled, but also how individuals are perceived and treated. Judges, who are supposed to be neutral, are not immune to their biases. These biases often manifest unconsciously, shaped by cultural norms and stereotypes that influence how people view others. In this particular case, the judge's presumptions about the woman were based on her race and appearance. He assumed she was just another participant in the court proceedings, perhaps a defendant, without any consideration of her background or role. This assumption was not only incorrect, but rooted in a bias that the judge didn't even realize he was perpetuating. When the woman steps forward and reveals her true identity as a federal prosecutor, the layers of this incident begin to unfold. It highlights an uncomfortable truth. Even those who hold positions of power, like judges and prosecutors, are often subject to the biases that exist within the very system they work in. This moment isn't just about a judge's embarrassment. It is a larger commentary on how society still grapples with issues of race, class, and gender, especially within authoritative structures like the legal system. The woman, who has likely faced her share of prejudice in her career, remains unfazed. Her response, grace under pressure, forces the judge and those in the courtroom to confront their own biases. It is a moment of reckoning, one that reveals the cracks in the foundation of the judicial system. This story is not just about the confrontation between a judge and a woman who is clearly more qualified than he initially perceived. It is a reflection of the systemic issues within the broader societal structure that affect everyone, even those in positions of power. The key players in this story are the judge and the federal prosecutor, but their roles go beyond just this particular case. The judge, with his arrogance and assumptions, represents the entrenched biases that are often present within the legal system. He's used to holding power and authority, and his position within the courtroom allows him to dictate the proceedings, at least until he is confronted with the truth. The federal prosecutor, on the other hand, is not just a character within this story, but a symbol of resilience and competence. She represents the individuals who are often overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed due to preconceived notions of who should hold power and authority. She has likely worked tirelessly to earn her position, and her confidence and poise in the face of the judge's ridicule showcase her ability to navigate a biased system while maintaining her integrity. Together, these two characters illuminate the larger themes at play in the story. The judge's ridicule, and the federal prosecutor's response serve as a metaphor for how people in power often dismiss those who do not fit their mold of what a professional or authority figure should look like. This is a critical moment in the script, one that forces the audience to ask themselves difficult questions about how they perceive authority and competence. The stakes in this story are high, far higher than the judge's bruised ego. What happens in this moment could have broader implications for the individuals involved and for the legal system as a whole. For the federal prosecutor, this incident is not just about confronting the judge's biases. It's about continuing to fight against a system that constantly seeks to undermine her abilities based on her appearance, gender, and race. Her response in the courtroom becomes a larger statement about standing up against discrimination and inequality, no matter the situation. For the judge, this is a moment of reckoning. His entire worldview is shaken by the discovery of the prosecutor's identity. The presumption that all the people he encounters are subordinates has been shattered. He must now confront not only his bias, but also the very idea that his position of authority might be questioned by someone he once assumed was beneath him. This moment challenges the judge's own perceptions of power, authority, and respect. As we move forward, this story will unfold in layers. The audience will witness the discovery of the prosecutor's true identity, the emotional and professional consequences of the judge's presumptions, and the deeper societal and systemic issues that are revealed as a result. This story won't just focus on one isolated moment. It will explore the lasting implications of this encounter, both for the individuals involved and for the larger conversations about race, authority, and power in society. In the sections that follow, we will delve into how the judge reacts to his mistake and what this reveals about the world they both inhabit. We will explore the complex relationships between power, race, and gender within the legal system, and how one seemingly small moment of bias can lead to profound consequences for all parties involved. At the core of this dramatic courtroom moment lies a deeper, more complex issue: racial and gender bias within the judicial system. What seemed like a simple case of a judge misjudging a woman's role in the courtroom exposes systemic flaws that persist, often unnoticed, in many of society's most powerful institutions. In this section, we will explore the personal, emotional, and societal struggles tied to this issue and the long-standing implications of systemic bias, particularly within the legal profession. For the federal prosecutor, this incident is not just an isolated moment of humiliation for the judge, but a lifetime of battles against prejudice and underestimation. The woman who stands in front of the judge, her demeanor calm and composed, has likely fought hard to gain respect in a profession where women, especially women of color, have historically been sidelined. From the moment she enters law school, she's been tasked with proving not only her competence, but her right to exist in this space. Being underestimated and dismissed is a daily reality for many individuals in the professional world. But when this happens in a courtroom, the stakes are far higher. For this federal prosecutor, every day is a test of resilience. She knows she must outwork and outperform those around her to even be considered as capable as her male, often white, counterparts. But even with all her qualifications and experience, she is constantly forced to prove that she belongs. Whether it's being ignored in meetings or having her ideas attributed to others, the microaggressions she faces are compounded by a society that is often quick to place limitations on her based on race and gender. This incident in the courtroom isn't just about the judge's mistake. It's about the ongoing toll these systemic biases take on people's careers, mental health, and sense of self-worth. It's the frustration of knowing that no matter how far she advances, there will always be someone who doesn't see her as the professional she truly is. The emotional weight of having to constantly prove oneself is exhausting. And even in moments like these, when she stands tall in the face of ridicule, there's an undercurrent of anger and disbelief. Why should she have to fight so hard to be taken seriously? The question she faces is not unique. Many individuals, particularly women of color, navigate these struggles daily in various professions, often choosing to either adapt to or fight against these biases. But this moment in the courtroom represents the tipping point where all of that frustration boils over. Her calm response to the judge's ridicule is not simply a professional stance, but a symbol of the emotional resilience that she has had to develop throughout her career. Yet it also highlights a tragic irony. The very system that is meant to uphold justice is the one that is repeatedly failing her, and those like her, in subtle and overt ways. While the federal prosecutor's personal struggles form the emotional backbone of this story, the external conflict revolves around the broader systemic issues that shape the legal field. The courtroom is meant to be a space of impartiality, a place where justice is not swayed by race, gender, or socioeconomic status. However, this incident exposes how deeply embedded biases can affect even the most well-trained professionals. In the legal system, there's a long history of racial disparities that continue to persist today. Studies have consistently shown that people of color, particularly Black women, face disproportionate levels of scrutiny and discrimination compared to their white counterparts. According to a 2019 study by the American Bar Association, Black women make up only 2% of practicing lawyers in the United States. This lack of representation at the highest levels contributes to the biases that permeate the legal profession. In many courtrooms, there is a presumption of incompetence or inferiority when it comes to Black women, especially those in authoritative roles such as prosecutors, defense attorneys, or judges. The impact of this discrimination is not just personal, it has institutional consequences. Cases involving Black individuals often result in harsher sentences and biased judgments. Even when they are the victims of crimes, there is a tendency to view their testimony with suspicion or doubt. This pattern perpetuates a cycle of racial injustice that extends beyond the courtroom and into society at large. In this case, the judge's initial presumption about the federal prosecutor was not just a mistake in judgment. It was a reflection of the racial biases embedded in the very fabric of the legal system. Furthermore, gender plays a significant role in this bias. Women, particularly women of color, often face an additional layer of discrimination. They are frequently perceived as being less authoritative, less competent, and more emotional than their male counterparts. These stereotypes, deeply rooted in patriarchy and racism, have been carried into modern legal systems, where women in law are forced to prove themselves not only as skilled professionals, but as individuals who deserve respect. This intersectionality, the combined effect of race and gender discrimination, creates an even more hostile environment for women like the prosecutor in this story. The story of the federal prosecutor and the judge is not just an isolated incident. It is a microcosm of a much larger problem that affects countless others across different professions. Whether it is a woman of color in law, business, or academia, the reality is that these biases affect the daily lives and careers of many people who must constantly prove their worth in environments that are systematically skewed against them. This makes the emotional toll all the more significant. The judge may have apologized, but the structural forces that allowed this event to happen in the first place remain unchecked. At the heart of this conflict is the ongoing struggle to address the underlying causes of systemic bias. This issue has evolved over centuries, with racial and gender disparities rooted in a history of oppression, colonization, and segregation. While there have been many advancements in civil rights and gender equality, the legal system, like many other institutions, has been slow to fully embrace change. Why is this issue still unresolved? The answer lies in the unconscious biases that shape decision-making processes. These biases are often invisible, embedded in societal norms, and deeply ingrained in the systems that govern us. For instance, the judge's automatic assumption that the woman was a subordinate was not a conscious decision, but a reflection of broader societal assumptions about race and gender. These biases have been passed down through generations, and as much as we like to believe we live in a post-racial society, the reality is that the judicial system remains influenced by stereotypes and unequal power dynamics. Moreover, the lack of diversity within the legal profession, both in terms of race and gender, further exacerbates this issue. When decision-makers such as judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys are predominantly from one demographic group, it becomes difficult to dismantle the inherent biases that shape their perceptions and actions. A lack of diverse voices within the legal profession limits the ability to fully address issues of systemic injustice, as decisions are made by individuals who may not fully understand or empathize with the lived experiences of marginalized communities. This section has delved into the complexities surrounding systemic bias and the struggle for equity within the judicial system. The tension now mounts, as we consider how this issue can be addressed. Can the legal system truly change? Or are we locked in a cycle of bias that continues to affect people of color, particularly Black women, in ways that are deeply damaging to both their personal and professional lives? The question is not only about this incident, but about the ongoing challenge of confronting bias within powerful institutions. After the judge's belittling and the subsequent apology, it would have been easy for the situation to dissipate, an awkward moment that was brushed under the rug. But for the federal prosecutor, the experience was a catalyst for action. This was not just about a single incident. It was about confronting a larger pattern of systemic inequality that had been tolerated for far too long. The turning point in this story comes when the prosecutor, unwilling to let this moment slide, decides to investigate further into the root causes of the bias she had faced. The first step in this journey was self-reflection. What had happened in the courtroom wasn't an isolated event, but rather a reminder of the many subtle ways in which bias pervades her professional life. From being overlooked in meetings to having her competence questioned in moments of high pressure, she realized that the dismissal she faced in the courtroom was part of a much larger issue of racial and gender prejudice within the legal profession. But it wasn't just about how she had been personally affected. It was about the impact on the entire legal system and the discriminatory structures that allowed such biases to thrive unnoticed. If this were happening to her, an accomplished professional with years of experience, what was happening to those who didn't have the same privilege or status? The prosecutor's decision to take action marks the beginning of an investigative journey. She starts by consulting with colleagues, some of whom have faced similar challenges, and some who are willing to listen but may not fully understand the weight of what she's trying to convey. There's a subtle hesitance at first, because talking about bias in the workplace, especially in an institution like the legal system, can feel like a dangerous move. People might dismiss her concerns, label her as too sensitive, or worse, accuse her of undermining the integrity of the very system she's fighting to protect. Nevertheless, she gathers the courage to confront this issue head-on. She begins by documenting instances of subtle and overt biases she and others have experienced. This isn't just about her situation in one courtroom. It's about uncovering patterns of racial and gender discrimination across different courts, districts, and cases. The more she investigates, the more instances of underestimated competence and undermined authority she finds. She interviews colleagues, some of whom share stories of disrespect, dismissive attitudes, and assumptions based on race and gender. One of the pivotal moments comes when she learns that numerous studies have shown the deep-seated racial and gender biases within the legal field. She uncovers research from the American Bar Association and other legal organizations that highlight the lack of diversity among judges, prosecutors, and legal professionals, and the stereotypes that shape their interactions with those they encounter. But beyond the data, she uncovers personal testimonies from other Black women in the field who have faced similar situations, sometimes even worse. As her investigation deepens, the prosecutor uncovers something even more disturbing. This bias isn't just limited to individual actors within the legal system, but embedded within the institutional structures themselves. The system is built to perpetuate inequalities that often go unnoticed because they are so ingrained in the daily workings of the profession. One of the most revealing discoveries is how mentorship systems in law often exclude people of color, particularly Black women, from crucial career opportunities and promotions. Without mentorship, many legal professionals are cut off from networks of influence that could propel their careers forward, keeping them stuck in lower ranks despite their qualifications. Furthermore, she learns that the selection processes for judgeships and prosecutorial roles often favor candidates who fit the mold of tradition, which is predominantly white and male. This hidden bias extends to law school admissions, hiring practices in law firms, and even promotions within government agencies. The more she learns, the more it becomes clear. The legal system itself is designed in ways that make it difficult for marginalized groups to succeed at the highest levels, no matter their competence. The prosecutor also discovers that this issue is not just about the legal professionals themselves, but about the clients they serve. Black defendants, in particular, are subject to harsher sentences and biased judgments based on the same prejudices that affect the professionals working on their cases. This cycle of discrimination continues across generations, affecting the very fabric of the justice system. It's a sobering realization for the prosecutor. What she's uncovered goes beyond her own experience and touches on a much larger societal issue that impacts thousands of lives. The deeper she digs into the data and speaks with colleagues, the more the emotional toll of this investigation begins to weigh on her. It's one thing to experience bias in isolated moments, but it's an entirely different experience to confront the reality that these biases are part of a larger, entrenched system. Each conversation with colleagues, each revelation of how deep the problem runs, brings with it a sense of despair and anger. The prosecutor, a seasoned professional, feels the weight of this injustice not just as a colleague in the field, but as a Black woman whose entire career has been shaped by the very system she's now investigating. This toll also affects her professionally. She begins to question whether or not her career is worth the emotional strain. Is the system really capable of change, or is it rigged against people like her? At times, doubt creeps in. It would be easier to step back, accept the status quo, and move forward in her career as best as she can. But as she goes deeper into her investigation, the idea of letting this moment go without action becomes untenable. The emotional burden of living in a system that doesn't acknowledge her worth is too heavy to ignore. The true turning point in this story happens when the prosecutor uncovers a fundamental flaw in the judicial system, one that explains the root of her experiences and the judge's actions that day. It isn't just about individual prejudice. It's about the culture of entitlement and dominance that exists within the legal profession. The moment she connects these dots, she realizes that the only way to change the system is to speak out. She can no longer remain silent, hoping for change. The more she uncovers about the lack of support for people of color in the legal field, the more convinced she becomes that change must happen at the highest levels. At this moment, she decides to take a stand. She begins gathering her findings, data, personal stories, academic research, and prepares to bring this issue to the attention of the public. This decision to speak out marks the beginning of a new chapter in her life. It's no longer just about her. It's about creating a platform for those who have faced similar challenges. She begins drafting a public statement, preparing to release it to the media, and share her findings with both the legal community and the general public. Her investigation culminates in a decision to confront the institution. She will no longer allow her voice to be silenced by the very systems meant to uphold justice. By bringing the issue of racial and gender bias into the spotlight, she aims to ignite a larger conversation about how the legal field, long regarded as a pillar of fairness, has failed to deliver true justice to marginalized communities. Having spent months gathering data, speaking with colleagues, and coming to terms with the emotional weight of her investigation, the prosecutor is now ready to take a bold step. The solution she has uncovered is not just a personal one. It's something that can transform the entire system. She realizes that the only way to address the pervasive racial and gender biases in the legal field is to bring the issue to light on a national stage. It's time to take her findings and use them as a tool for change. The first step in this transformation is a public statement. The prosecutor drafts a powerful message, laying out the findings of her investigation. She doesn't just highlight her own experience. She emphasizes the broader systemic issues that affect not only women of color, but anyone who falls outside the traditional, predominantly white male mold of legal professionals. The statement is not just a recounting of facts. It's a call to action, urging the legal community, lawmakers, and the public to recognize and address the biases that have been allowed to persist for generations. She carefully considers her words. This is a delicate balance. The need to be firm in her stance, yet diplomatic enough to avoid outright alienation. She knows this message will be controversial and that it will be met with resistance from those who benefit from the current system. But she also knows that silence will only perpetuate the status quo. In the days leading up to the release of her statement, she prepares herself emotionally for the potential backlash. The legal profession has long been resistant to change, and challenging its deeply ingrained biases is sure to stir up discomfort. Once the statement is ready, the prosecutor sends it out to major legal publications, media outlets, and organizations within the legal community. She knows that this move will create waves, but it's the only way to expose the issue and start the conversation that has long been overdue. The release of her statement generates immediate attention. Within hours, media outlets pick up the story, and legal communities from across the country begin to engage with the issue. At first, the response is a mix of shock and disbelief. Many in the legal profession are reluctant to admit that the system they have long championed could be so fundamentally flawed. The backlash is swift and harsh. Conservative voices argue that the prosecutor is simply exaggerating the problem, that the legal field is one of the most meritocratic professions. They dismiss the findings as a result of personal bias or poor performance. Some even accuse her of undermining the integrity of the profession. Other critics claim that race and gender bias may exist in small pockets, but don't reflect the broader reality of the legal system. This backlash is not just from those within the legal community, but from politicians, commentators, and members of the public who refuse to acknowledge that systemic bias exists within institutions that are considered pillars of fairness and equality. In response, the prosecutor feels the weight of the resistance. She's labeled as divisive, and some of her colleagues avoid her, uncomfortable with the fact that they now have to address the issue she has brought to the forefront. But she remains resolute, understanding that real change is never easy, and that it's often met with initial resistance before gaining wider acceptance. Her resolve to push forward is reinforced by the sheer number of supporters she begins to hear from: Black women, people of color, and those who have experienced similar biases. She receives messages of support, encouragement, and even stories from other professionals who have faced the same challenges but didn't know how to speak up. In addition, several legal reform organizations begin to rally behind her efforts. They issue statements of their own, supporting her claims and urging further investigations into systemic bias. Some even start to gather their own data, revealing even deeper layers of discrimination within the legal field. This collective momentum helps to shift the conversation. While the backlash continues, it's clear that the prosecutor's actions have sparked something much larger: a national conversation about bias in the legal system. As the backlash begins to subside, the prosecutor finds herself at the center of a movement she never anticipated. Her initial statement was just the beginning. As the legal community begins to reckon with the truths she has exposed, reform initiatives begin to take shape. Law firms, law schools, and legal organizations that had once been silent on the matter are now speaking out, acknowledging the systemic biases that exist within their ranks. Several high-profile law firms and judicial associations start taking active steps to address diversity and inclusion within their hiring and promotion practices. Key developments emerge in the wake of the prosecutor's revelations. Law schools across the country begin to offer mandatory courses on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the legal field, recognizing that a more diverse pipeline is critical to the future of the profession. These changes are met with some resistance, particularly from those who argue that merit should be the only determining factor for success in law. However, data-backed studies show that diverse teams not only improve workplace culture, but also enhance the quality of decision-making and better reflect the communities they serve. Perhaps the most significant change comes from within the judiciary itself. The Bar Association and other legal governing bodies begin to enact policy reforms aimed at diversifying the judicial selection process. New measures are put in place to ensure that judges are not selected based on tradition or connection, but through a more equitable, transparent process. Additionally, programs are introduced to help mentor and guide women of color in their legal careers, ensuring they have the same opportunities for advancement as their white male counterparts. Despite these victories, the road to reform is not without its challenges. As more steps are taken toward inclusivity and diversity in the legal profession, there are still those who resist these changes at every turn. There are still legal professionals who refuse to acknowledge that systemic racism and gender bias exist, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. These individuals continue to argue that meritocracy should be the only criterion for advancement, ignoring the subtle yet powerful ways that race and gender impact one's opportunities in the legal field. Additionally, while diversity initiatives are gaining traction, they are often slow-moving and difficult to implement on a large scale. There are countless legal institutions, particularly those in smaller towns and rural areas, that continue to uphold traditional practices and views, remaining immune to the broader trends taking place in larger cities. However, the prosecutor's work has set something into motion that cannot be undone. As legal organizations across the nation begin to take action, there is an undeniable shift happening in the culture of law. Her investigation has ignited a movement that is still in its infancy, but its potential is vast. The prosecutor, now seen as a trailblazer, understands that while the road ahead is long, her decision to speak out was the first crucial step in what will be an ongoing struggle for justice, equity, and fairness in the legal profession. As the years unfold, the transformation sparked by the prosecutor's initial stand against systemic bias becomes not just a moment in history, but a lasting legacy that reshapes the legal profession and inspires other industries to follow suit. The initial wave of resistance and backlash has long faded, replaced by tangible change. The prosecutor, once an individual voice challenging the status quo, has now become an icon of courage and resilience. She no longer sees herself as just one person, but as the leader of a movement that has empowered countless others to speak up and demand justice. The legal profession is not the same as it was when she first entered the fray. The diversity initiatives that were once met with skepticism have now been woven into the fabric of the profession. Law firms, judicial associations, and legal schools across the country are now held to standards that prioritize equity, inclusion, and representation. The pipeline for women of color entering the legal profession has widened, and as a result, the profession has become more reflective of the society it serves. These changes, though still ongoing, are deeply ingrained, a testament to the prosecutor's unwavering commitment to creating a more just and fair system. One of the most significant shifts is the inclusion of diversity and cultural competence as core components in the education and training of legal professionals. Law schools are no longer teaching just the traditional pillars of law. They're now focused on equipping students with the tools to navigate the complex issues of race, gender, and systemic bias that continue to impact the legal system. These reforms have ensured that future generations of lawyers and judges will be better equipped to deal with the realities of the world around them. The prosecutor's influence can be felt in the emergence of mentorship programs that pair experienced lawyers and judges with young professionals, particularly those from underrepresented communities. These programs have allowed a new generation of diverse lawyers to find a supportive environment where they can thrive, progress in their careers, and eventually reach the highest levels of the judiciary. More women of color are now entering prestigious positions, and they are bringing a new perspective that was once absent from the decision-making rooms that shape legal outcomes. While the prosecutor's personal journey is inspiring, the real triumph lies in the societal shifts that followed her courageous actions. Her fight for justice has had ripple effects across industries beyond law. Corporate America, government, and other traditionally male-dominated fields have also begun to confront the systemic inequalities that once permeated their ranks. The broader impact of her work has been profound, shifting the national dialogue from one of passive acceptance of inequality to one where active reform is not only necessary, but expected. The media's role in amplifying the prosecutor's story played a critical part in shifting public opinion. The more people saw her as a symbol of justice, someone who was unafraid to call out the biases she had personally experienced, the more they were encouraged to reflect on their own biases and the systemic inequities in their lives. Her story became a blueprint for others, proving that change was possible if people dared to challenge the systems that had long held them back. This has led to a cultural shift where issues of race, gender, and power are now viewed as intertwined, and addressing one requires confronting all of them. The legal system is no longer seen as neutral or impartial, but as a dynamic, evolving institution that must be held accountable to the people it serves. The prosecutor's work has laid the foundation for legal reforms at every level, federal, state, and local, that continue to shape how justice is administered in this country. Her legacy is not just in the policies that were enacted, but in the mindsets that were altered. At the same time, the broader implications of her work extend beyond just the legal profession or even issues of race and gender. Her stance challenged society to reconsider its definition of merit and fairness, encouraging a shift from the notion that success is purely about individual achievement to one that considers the broader structural barriers that limit opportunities. This thinking has begun to permeate other institutions, and the concept of equity, ensuring that everyone has access to the resources they need to succeed, has gained a much stronger foothold in public discourse. Although tremendous progress has been made, the work is far from over. As with any movement, the prosecutor's actions have sparked new challenges, forcing people to rethink the progress they've made and the areas in which they still fall short. While much has been achieved in diversifying the legal profession, many communities still experience significant disparities in access to justice, particularly those who are disadvantaged or marginalized. In the years following the prosecutor's efforts, the movement for racial and gender justice within the legal system continues to evolve. New leaders rise, inspired by her example, to tackle the remaining injustices that persist within the system. They build on the reforms she set in motion, focusing on ensuring that the legal system is truly inclusive and that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, has the opportunity to succeed. Collective efforts at the grassroots level continue to push for better access to affordable legal representation, addressing issues like over-policing, mass incarceration, and legal protections for the most vulnerable members of society. Looking to the future, the prosecutor's legacy serves as a touchstone, reminding everyone of the power of one individual's actions to inspire profound, long-lasting change. But it also challenges the legal system, and indeed society at large, to keep evolving. The fight for justice, equality, and fairness is ongoing, and the prosecutor's role in this broader conversation continues to provide guidance and inspiration for future generations. In reflecting on the prosecutor's journey, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Real change does not come easily, and it often requires the courage to speak truth to power, even when that truth is uncomfortable. The prosecutor's decision to speak out, despite the personal risks and professional challenges she faced, was the catalyst for a fundamental shift that has reshaped the legal profession and sparked broader societal transformation. But the journey is not over. The prosecutor's work was just the beginning of an ongoing process of reflection, reform, and renewal. As we look to the future, it is important to remember that the world we inhabit is constantly changing, and the systems that govern our society must continue to evolve as well. Structural inequality, whether in the legal system or in any other institution, requires continuous attention and the willingness to challenge the status quo. For those who continue this work, the prosecutor's story serves as both a warning and an inspiration. It's a reminder of the deep-seated resistance that reformers will face, but also a testament to the power of courage and perseverance. It is up to future generations to continue the work, to build on the foundation laid, and to create a world where justice truly is blind to race, gender, and power. The call to action is clear. Change is possible, but it requires us all to act. It requires us to engage, to challenge, and to never back down in the pursuit of a more just and equitable society. And as we reflect on the lasting impact of the prosecutor's fight, we must each ask ourselves, how can we contribute to the movement for justice, not just today, but for the generations to come?